Okay, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. My name is Anya Leonard. I'm the founder and director of Classical Wisdom, a site dedicated to bringing ancient wisdom to modern minds. For those of you who are new to Classical Wisdom, you can find us along with our free newsletter at classicalwisdom.substack.com. We've spent the last decade working to promote and preserve the ancient world by demonstrating how applicable it is in our lives in the here and now. And today we're going to be speaking specifically about ancient languages and our mission to promote them and preserve them, but in part by doing that, by making it interesting to the next generation and showing its value. I think while a lot of you will already be familiar with the whys, we'll still touch on that because I think it's important for everybody to have that reinforced, even if it's for their own conversations with others. But we'll also be getting into the specific hows, and we will be hearing from our different panelists and be discussing this topic. And then we'll also be accepting questions. So feel free to write questions in the chat at any time. But we'll address them closer to the end. And so with that, I would love to introduce our very distinguished panelists. Really honored to have three incredibly knowledgeable people in this department joining us today. So we have Eugenia, who is a Greek classical composer, conductor, entertainment television presenter, and course director at Elliniki Agogi, a school dedicated the ancient Greek language, history, and philosophy to adults and children since 1994. We have Stephen Hunt, the senior teaching associate at the University of Cambridge, editor of the Journal of Classics Teaching, and works at the Association for Latin Teaching, the Cambridge School of Classics Project, and Classics for All. So we're lucky he even has time for us. And we also have Gerardo Guzmàn, the professor of ancient Greek language, who teaches at the famous Vivarium Novum Academy in Rome. So thank you three for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Now, I'd love to start a little bit with just the state of ancient languages. Are they endangered? How many speakers are there worldwide? Is this something we do need to preserve? Perhaps, Stephen, you can start us off.
Okay, I was looking up, I have to say, I Googled the number of people speaking Latin in the present day. And so I reluctantly, I don't know myself, but it seems to be that they reckon somewhere between, well, about 100 people perhaps might be considered to be fluent speakers of Latin across the whole world.
Wow.
I think that's a bit of an underestimate, I have to say. But it's not big. In terms of those people learning Latin, there's a huge variety, isn't there? Because and different countries measure it in different ways. So I don't think I really know the answer to that question. I can speak for the UK, where there are probably in the region of, I think, probably about maybe 100,000 kids studying classical languages in schools, but they would not all be studying it at the same level. I wouldn't know about the States, I'm afraid. Obviously, in Europe, in continental Europe, many of the countries there have classical languages as part of their curriculum, and so numbers there will be very large by comparison with the population. But it's a number I need to look up if it ever exists anywhere, or if anyone can help me with that.
Or is it specifically in Greece or better? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Well, I think if I may jump in the conversation, I think that there are many more people learning and speaking Latin and ancient Greek as we speak that are not registered yet. I've been meeting people that, I'm learning how to speak ancient Greek. I can read much better than speak it. And I've been trying the last 3 to 4 years. And Gerardo has been helping me a lot to learn how to speak ancient Greek. But I'm constantly meeting people that are not Greek and learn how to speak ancient Greek. And they're almost fluent in ancient Greek. Young people mostly, that they go around, I love this, they go around with their cell phones, taking a video of themselves walking in the woods, talking about nature in ancient Greek, about their lives, about anything, in order to practice. And we are seeing that over and over again. There are so many programs from Oxford, from Cambridge, that come to Greece every summer for many, many years in order to go to a village or a small town and stay there for a couple of weeks just to practice speaking ancient Greek. We know that since last year, Oxford has put oral programs, classes of spoken Greek and Latin in the curriculum. So maybe in a few years, I don't know how many there are right now, but in a few years, I'm sure we will have many, many fluent speakers of ancient Greek and Latin. And I hope I'm going to be one of them.
I think it's wonderful that it still is something that people are really paying attention to. But I'm sure for all three of you, you've heard many times in your life, what's the point? And maybe Gerardo, you can jump in and add to this.
Yeah, thank you. I think the first thing that's important to understand that is the Latin and Greek literature are not a subject for specialization. It's our life. It's the part, a very important part of our life. And you can perceive that because in this moment, many universities, as Eugenia and Steve said, are trying to approach in another way, in a fresher way. But as we can perceive, we can understand, this fresher way is a very traditional way. This is the way which we must learn all the languages, and we can understand the literature of as a part of our life. And for this reason, I think this very moment is important because we can try to preserve, but we can try to live again this literature, these languages, and understand that it's a living thing, a living part of us. I think this is very, very important thing now.
And Stephen, would you have anything to add to that?
Well, I was going to say, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, both Oxford and Cambridge universities, as Eugenia just as rightly pointed out, have started up Latin and Greek speaking parts of their courses. I think they're optional at the moment rather than compulsory. Melinda Letts, for example, I think runs the Oxford Latinitas, which is based in I'm not quite sure whether it's in or part of the university. And there've certainly been some very positive responses, both from the students and in terms of outcomes. But of course, we're talking about a very self-selected group, and we're talking about people who have probably learned classical languages before, maybe by the traditional route. And I think what we are partly here also to talk about this evening is to think about the traditional routes of learning languages, learning ancient languages, by the kind of textbook method and by the kind of slow process method of translation and looking things up in vocabulary lists, is something that we are reassessing. I think we're at the moment, we're in a bit of a turning point at the moment in how we teach and how we can learn ancient languages. I know my two colleagues on this panel will know a lot more about that than I do, because they have been practicing it themselves. So no doubt we'll talk about that ourselves a bit more. But I think we're at a really, really interesting point where, because the universities have started to look at this new way of, it's actually a very old way of teaching, but they've started to look at this more progressive way of teaching, something that's perhaps more aligned with modern languages. I think because they've started doing it, other people will start to follow.
It's becoming a trend.
It's becoming a what? Sorry, Eugenia?
A trend.
A trend, like, yes. Yeah, absolutely. No. I mean, I went to it's interesting. I went to a little conference that was held in Harrow School a few months ago, and there were a number of teachers there from a number of schools, some big, famous schools in the UK, and they were trying out spoken Latin. They weren't doing spoken Greek, but they were trying out spoken Latin, or ways of trying to make Latin a bit more like a living language, like the living language that it really is, in their classes. It was a very interesting day. And I hope that it'll be repeated. And my intention this year is to go to those schools and actually see what's going on in the actual classroom. But I think we are right. I think Eugenia, you're absolutely right. This is a trend that is accelerating at the moment, that we're teaching classical languages as if they are real languages that people can communicate ideas with.
And I think that this is happening because it's so much more fun. And kids want to have fun while learning anything, especially something that is very challenging, as it is with classical languages. Because learning all these rules and the grammar and the syntax can be really boring and exhausting. But by adding the spoken element to the class, it immediately becomes so much more fun. And if the teacher is talented and charismatic, and most of the people that teach classics right now in schools are very charismatic, they immediately introduce this kind of method in the classroom, and a very boring subject becomes right away one of the most interesting ones.
Now, can I ask? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, well, sorry. Yes, I was thinking about that because it's very important to perceive this that the students are enjoying the subject. It's very important because many times the first thing that avoid the learning of the languages is the philosophy, history, and then we must think that this is when we speak, when we practice the language, we are able to approach the text in a very, very short time. For example, after 3 weeks, we can read Sappho. And for many young people, the possibility to feel the beauty and the deep senses and the deep feel of Sappho in a very short time, it's an input to learn. Each effort, it's in the order to achieve a goal, to arrive to a goal, a very, very important goal.
Gerardo, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you just for a second, if I may.
Happy, motivated. Yes, please.
Sorry, can I just confirm, is everyone else having a bit of difficulty hearing you? I think yeah, your connection has
perhaps I will search. I think
it might be worthwhile even if you can change your Wi-Fi or going out and coming in again, because I can hear your point that within 3 weeks people can start to understand Sappho, and I think that is a beautiful point and really important. So I want to be able to hear you a little bit better. Would you be able to see if your connection's a bit improved?
Yeah, I will try again. So good in this moment. A very pity, but well, it's a little problem with the technology always. Sorry. Then I was saying that when the students are motivated, they work very hard, but they are very happy. And it must be our way. Practice in order to show that they can arrive to the text in a very short time, but not only to see the text and have the illusion or have the false idea that they are reading. No, they can understand deeply the text. Can you hear me?
Yes. I mean, I think it's interesting, the concept of understanding the text and connecting with it. But in some ways, I wonder if part of the learning of these ancient languages needs to start younger. And, you know, while my daughters pretty interested in Sappho, mostly because I wrote a children's book about Sappho. Maybe your average kid is not going to want to connect with the poetry immediately, or the literature immediately, because they're 3 or 4 or 5. So in that way, I'd love to ask this to Eugenia, if we need to be approaching to the children or to the parents, what's the best way to kind of instill this interest?
Of course. I'm sorry. Was that for me or for Stephen? Sorry.
Oh,
Well, I want to hear both of you.
You go. Yeah, you go.
Okay, great. For just a small parenthesis, in order to talk about Gerardo. Gerardo is in a beautiful Renaissance villa in Frascati, not in the center of Italy, not in Rome. He is in a beautiful suburb, but he's actually inside the Vivarium Novum Academy. So if any one of you wants to Google the Vivarium Novum Academy, they will see that this is a Renaissance villa actually in the middle of nowhere. So it comes as no surprise that the signal might not function as well at all times. Now, coming to your point, of course, we need to address children. To me, it's imperative that we start, that the classics start at school at a very early age, because the parents do not always know the benefits of learning a classical language. And especially if we speak about children of 6 or 7 or 8 years old, their parents are what, 30s, in their 30s and their 40s. They have also not been taught classics at school most of the time, as maybe our grandparents or great-grandparents had. So they are not so well informed about the benefits of learning a classical language. Whereas if you start with kids, and of course, you don't teach them Sappho, but you teach them about mythology. All children love mythology. We have Aesop's fables. We have so many beautiful sources of Greek mythology that most children know and love. And through mythology, you can start introducing words, notions, according to their age. You can even teach them through drawing or small drama plays, small theatrical plays, by exchanging dialogues. They immediately they can pretend to be the tortoise and the hare, and they speak to one another in ancient Greek right away. When they're older, they love to pretend that they're Athena and Poseidon fighting for the name of Athens. This is not for adults, but it works for kids very well. And by starting to learn these words, then they go to phrases, then meanings, then jump to the original text for a little while, then go back to adaptation texts. And this way, before they finish school, they can read easy classical texts from the original without realizing how easy it was. And then the magic starts. Because the thing with the classical languages is that you don't realize their benefits before you learn them. Nobody tells you have to learn ancient Greek because it would help you communicate with your peers, but it does. Because through ancient Greek, you come to touch with ancient Greek philosophy. By learning a little bit about ancient Greek philosophy, you communicate better with your peers. But this is something that I cannot convince young people if I don't show them the text, if I don't show them that it can happen. So this is the hardest part for me, is to convince them to start. When they start, they fall in love with them.
That's a really good point, Eugenia. I mean, we're lucky here in the UK in that after something like 34 years, of government indifference to classical education in state-maintained schools, the present government has shown quite a lot of interest in classics, probably because some of the ministers involved have been classicists themselves. So, for example, in the UK, I think we're the only country in living memory, really, which has made Latin or ancient Greek a study at primary level. So students can study Latin or Greek or any modern language between the ages of 7 and 11. Through my work with Classics for All, we know that there have been several hundred primary schools which have taken the opportunity to offer Latin, and one of two, not that many, I have to say, for ancient Greek. And most of it, as Eugenia says, is through very simple Latin, very simple Greek. It's using the language. So it's actually finding out about mythology. It's finding out about the ancient world, which is the obvious interest point. And then it's using knowledge about the Latin or about the ancient Greek to learn a little bit about the languages. Now, many students, when they're age 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever it might be, many of those students accept what happens to them in classes. They learn Latin just like they would learn geography, or they learn Latin just like they would learn history. It's just things that you do in school. And once we've created that kind of sense that classics is something that you just do, and they can then experience it and like it or reject it, let's face it, but at least they've had the chance. Then when they get to secondary school, what we hope in the long term is that it will encourage parents to say, well, my daughter started learning Latin in their primary school, why can't they carry on doing it in their secondary school? And the thing that's happened fairly recently, only this year, is that we've had, the government has put in some money, £4 million, to establish a thing called the Latin Excellence Programme, which is designed to get 40 state-maintained, non-selective schools in the UK to start offering Latin with support, some subsidy, financial support from the government to employ a member of staff to teach it. That's the only way you're really going to get it going in schools, if there is a teacher to do so. And so that's a really good movement. And once students start doing it, they really do enjoy it, most of them. And they will enjoy it, I think, as Eugenia says, I think they will enjoy it if they use it rather than just study it. I mean, I'm not, don't get me wrong. I think students still will need to study Latin because the examination and assessment system that we have in the UK requires the study of it. But I think if we also get students to use Latin and to use ancient Greek by speaking it, even in very rudimentary, very simple forms, or writing about themselves, just using language, or by singing it, or by doing plays and things like that, we all know that that's a highly engaging and highly motivating way of learning a language. I mean, could you imagine learning French or Spanish or German just by sitting in a room and translating passages of French and German and Spanish? No, if you were to do that, people would think you were mad. And that's what we expect quite a lot of our students to do for classical languages. So I think the movement that we talked about earlier on, about encouraging slightly more active uses of the languages, is something which will motivate more of our students to continue.
I think that's very well said. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I would like to urge our audience to Google Stephen Hunt's bibliography, his books, his articles. I mean, he's talking about the government changes, but he's modest enough not to mention how hard he has tried to make this change, to help the government decide on doing this. And this is such a wonderful initiative. But you know now, Steve, that I will be expecting you to do the same for Greek, because in Latin now we have it. Now let's move on to Greek.
I mean, I think you're talking about, I mean, we have, I mean, I said, the first time in 34 years that the government showed an interest. I mean, in the UK since 1988, we have made Latin and Greek elitist. We've made it elitist, right? Because in 1988, we took it off the curriculum for most students. We made it virtually impossible for most students to do, except for those schools who had enough money to put it keep it on the curriculum and to employ members of staff. Now, a lot of, I was in Belgium just before Christmas, and I don't want to be cross about Belgium in any way, it's not my place. But it was interesting that there was a kind of expectation, not in Belgium, but in many countries, there's a kind of expectation that a certain sort of student should be allowed access to classical languages, but no one else. A certain sort of student should be allowed access to it. Now, one of the things that Classics for All, with whom I work, this charity Classics for All has been going on for about 10 years now. It goes around and it fundraises, it begs money off people who have been classicists in the past. Perhaps some of the people here might be sitting and saying, this is where my money goes. And it transfers the donations that that people make into training teachers in schools, in developing resources, in helping with policy initiatives from the government and all sorts of things like that, making links between universities and schools. It does a lot in the absence of a lot of government, in the absence of government help. And the point of it is that the key thing is it's classics for all. And you know, it's very interesting. I can't. What shall we do? We're Wednesday here in the UK. Yesterday, I was in Northampton, which is a small town in the East Midlands of the UK, and there the head teacher had decided that they wanted to have Latin in their school. And they have found a modern languages teacher who herself was French, and she had learnt Latin many years ago, and she was willing to give it a go. And so she had started up a little club at lunchtimes, and I went along to see how things were going along and to give her some advice and things for the day. A lot of what Classics for All does is extremely personalised. So the training that French teacher received yesterday with me was a whole day. Can you imagine a whole day with me? That might be a nice thing, might be a bad thing, depends on how you look at it. But a whole day with me, looking at the resources, looking at assessment, looking at things, and also best of all, looking to the future. How would classics develop within? How would Latin develop in that school, in that particular circumstance? Because I think the danger of most government ideas is that there's a kind of top-down approach. We will say you do it this way. And schools are very, very different from one place to the next, from one town to the next, from one part of a town to the next. So what Classics for All is very good at is going anywhere and working with anyone and supporting what is needed in the very specific circumstances of that school. And it requires a lot of legwork. I'm not the only person who does training for Classics for All. There are lots of other people as well. Some of it we do online, some of it we do face-to-face, but it's really personalised. Yes, we can do some Greek, Eugenia.
Great, thank you.
Well, I think it's. Oh, please. I wanted to say first off,
yes.
Thank you, Gerardo, for coming back.
Sorry, no, thank you. Yes, I think it's very. I think we must notice that the words of Steve are very, very important. This is the work of the government joined to the schools is very, very necessary, because if we don't offer a place and the time to the young people to come closer to these studies, it's impossible. This is the problem. This is the real situation, because we think that this is elite, it's for the elites, because many people cannot find the time for that, and school is the unique place. If we want delay the elitism of this kind of subject, we must diffuse in the schools, but we must diffuse too by the happiness of the studies, because I was saying it is not the way or the tool for the specialization. Literature is the mirror of the life. It is a mirror of the humanity, because it's a creation of the human mind. And for this very reason, this literature, the Greek and Latin literature, it's not the literature of Italian people or Greek people. In this literature, we can find, of course, Cicero, Caesar, Demosthenes, but we can find Ashoka and the laws and the ideas of the Buddhism. We can find the story of the Buddha in Joseph and Barlam. We can find the story of the American people of the Aborigines of America by the missionaries, by the for example, I'm Mexican. We have many documents about the causes of the legal causes between Spaniard and indigenous from Mexico, and the first moments of this union. Yes, a very big conflict, but nevertheless we have the documents and we can judge that, and we can understand that this language is no more the language of Cicero or Seneca or Plato or Isocrates. Is no more, it's not elitism. It's the unique way to feel the freedom to be giant, because these languages are the language to Europe, to Africa, to Asia, to America. The Chinese story, the history of China, it's mainly in Latin. We can see the wonder with which the European people saw for the first time the biggest empire of this time, of this time, and the moment in which this empire recognized that outside the borders of their own borders exist other very important cultures. When we can feel that, and we offer to the people, to the people the possibility to see that, to the young people, but not only to the young people, because this curiosity, this desire to search the people by the literature, and then live in the text, live in the book, see the other people, and see that we can live together again with the literature, but in the present time too. It's very important because it's not a language of the past. It's a language which linked us to the past in order to be in our present and to build our future. And this is, I think, when many people ask why we must learn Latin and Greek, the question by itself, it's a problem. It's because we don't feel more the life in these languages. We don't feel more that this is the mirror of the life, and we cannot perceive that it's necessary see ourselves in this mirror. And as in a magical mirror, we can see ourselves, other times, other people, and again, other people, other times in ourselves, and search ourselves in the other people and the other times.
Now,
I think.
Yeah, I think so. No, I think you're right that it's showing people that it's a mirror or a window, both that's valuable. And we've addressed a bit with Stephen about sort of addressing this issue at an institutional level, and we've talked about sort of individuals. But as you say, if we try to have these top-down government approaches, if there's not a cultural demand, then those kind of top-down initiatives are probably going to have not necessarily be successful. There might be a reaction to them. So how do we encourage a sort of a cultural love of this? And maybe I can pass it on to Eugenia to add in your insights as well with ancient Greek.
Excuse me, what was the question?
Well, one specifically is if we have these initiatives where we kind of try to teach these ancient languages or classical languages to individuals, and we also try to advocate for them at a institutional level or a government level, to make sure that it works, that we need to have a cultural movement, I think, to make it supported. How can we kind of encourage a cultural desire for these languages?
Well, I don't really know. I mean, I'm not sure. I have some ideas, but I would like to remind our audience that the Greece, when it was liberated from Ottoman Empire, it all started through a cultural movement. Romanticism started. Art was there. Art was being inspired by mythology, by the Greek classicism. Every European at that point, or the majority of the people in Europe at that point, could speak ancient Greek and Latin. And we know, because we have the methods through which they were learning how to speak and write in ancient Greek and Latin. And we know that they could read the texts from the original. And this is what they came here for. They came to Greece in order to save the idea of Greece, not the geographical territory, but the ideas, the culture, the language through which they came close. They touched the civilization of the Greek people. So I don't know how this can happen now, such a big, strong movement through art. But being a musician, what I'm trying to do here in Elliniki Agogi is try to put as much music as possible to Greek verses, poems, even create small songs. Because through art is a wonderful medium to bring children close to anything, because art, like classical languages, is very pure and it's very direct. It speaks to the soul, it speaks to the mind. I mean, and it speaks the truth. Who can tell that art is lying? Who can tell that classical texts are lying at any point? And this is also another point I would like to mention, because I hear a lot of people saying, okay, what is the point of learning a classical language, since all the major texts are already been translated in all the modern languages? And this is another point I would like to say, to address, that in order to read and understand the texts, you need at least to be able to look to the original text and pick up a few words, understand a few words, if not the whole text, because I can see that this may be very hard for someone that is not accustomed to really studying and reading the classical texts. But I would like just to say two examples in order to prove my point. We have Plato's Republic, right? In Greek, this is ipolitia. Politia is not the republic. It's not democracy. It's another word. So even Plato's title is misinterpreted, because politia is not republic. The same thing happens with the word muses. We say the 9 muses, and we correctly reflect that the word muses is where music started from. And this is correct. But the music of today is not the music of the ancient times. And by the 9 muses, we would not only address to art, but also to education as a whole. So if I call someone philomuso, which is the lover of music, the muses, I'm not addressing someone as a friend, a lover of music, but as a lover of education, and I call him philomuso. So look how many words I had to use in order to show my point. Someone that knows about muses and the music and the word itself, and the philo, which is I love. Like we have philosophy, we have philanthropy. We know that the philo before the Greek words, it means I love. So in order to say I love music as a philomusos, it actually means that I love education. So then there are millions of points in order to show how much magic we lose by not knowing even a few words, a few phrases in the classical languages.
I think you're totally right. And can I just say very quickly that is with regards to like a virtuous cycle of this, when people do learn the languages, they can be new translations, and they can be translations done by people who may have historically not have translated these texts. And those new perspectives open the books up in a new light. And I mean, I often use the Emily Wilson translation, which was very popular, but it's also very readable. So if that then encourages a new generation of people to pick up the books that might not have because the text was translated a long time ago, these new translations, I think, is a wonderful way to open that gate. Now, Stephen, I feel like you've got plenty to add on.
I was going to say, I was very interested about the idea that students, how will they come into learning a language if they don't know it exists in the first place, or they don't know what it's for? And I think sometimes we take a very adult view about how to do this, and it's going to help you understand etymology. It's going to be useful for you for this, that, and the other. It's going to be good for translating, and so on and so forth. Most of our students who start the languages sadly never get that far to translating anything. So there's got to be something in it for them right from the start. And I think also we have to think about what is drawing our students into knowing about the classical world at all, and do they know it's about the classical world sufficiently that they will then do a bit more digging down so that they end up with a language, looking at the language. I'm thinking, for example, you know, I was thinking about the TV programs that sort of about the classical world, whether they're documentaries or whether they're TV series which involve classical references and things like that. I'm thinking about musicals that are on in the West End, or you can download off Netflix or whatever it might be. I'm thinking about endless museums and cultural institutions and things like that, which most of our students in the UK, and I suspect in other parts of the world as well, get dragged along to, either in school or by their parents or whatever. But do they make that connection that what they're looking at is something that they can study at school in some way, or learn about at school in some way? Probably not. Because if you go and watch, you know, say you go and watch Hades, I don't know how many people have watched Hades Town. You know, it's a fantastic musical. Which, you know, if you didn't know anything about Hades, if you didn't know anything about the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, might completely pass you by. And you think, well, that was great. It was a wonderful show, but there we go. But we know as classicists that the references and the storyline within that is deeply resonant and deeply significant, and one of the most important stories in the classical mythological tradition. How do we get through to those students who watch those things and don't put two and two together? And I think there needs to be some way of, you know, digital media of some sort, which kind of is aimed at students, aimed at kids, which makes these connections between the sorts of things that they watch on TV or watch on Netflix or that they see around them, and makes that connection, and then gives them directions and pointers and signage to follow it up somehow. Now, I think, you know, I mean, I'm too old. I'm 58. I don't know about these things, but my daughter's 16 and she's endlessly on TikTok. She picks up from TikTok the books that 16-year-old girls are reading at the moment. She picks up on TikTok how she's supposed to feel about political reactions and feelings and emotions. She picks up on TikTok everything that passes me by because I don't read newspapers anymore. Now, why? Maybe there are social media things out there that I'm not aware of, which could be utilized to tell students of a young age about what the classical world is about and direct them towards it. I think there's another thing. I mean, Ronnie Ancona's here, and I think I saw in the chat box that we have to be a little careful sometimes about the things that we show our students, because we don't want to tell students about the ancient world without any kind of criticality, because some of the things about the ancient world are not perfect. They're not wonderful. They're not pure. And that, in a sense, is for a younger person, that might be an appealing thing, to think that what looks nice and straightforward is in fact rather complicated. But I come back to the original point, which is Do we need to learn a language in order to access this information? I mean, you don't need to know Latin or Greek to go to Hades Town. You don't need Latin or Greek to be able to, I don't know, read Percy Jackson. So my feeling is this, is that if you provide them with the opportunity to learn the language, you start with the Percy Jackson, you start with the Hades, you start with the TV, and you broaden those students' interest in it, and then you dive into the language. And then that makes them think about the things that they've been watching and seeing and reading beforehand more meaningful, because they want to find out what was the original and how can I find out about the original. I have to use the language in it to do it. But that's a long process for a kid. That's something that starts, as I say, at maybe the age of 6 or 7 or 8 and goes on to the age of 17 or 18 or beyond. It's something which takes a very long time. And though I appreciate that you can get students to read, and I don't mean to criticize, but I appreciate that you can get kids to read Sappho after 3 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever it might be. But we're really talking about preparing students to be able to critically engage with big issues, big, interesting, worthwhile issues about the ancient world and how that has resonated throughout history up to the present day, and how which also has impact on the way that some people, quite a lot of people, maybe think about things today as well. I mean, you know, here I live in sunny Cambridge, where it's raining outside. Here I live in rainy Cambridge, and you know, you can walk down the road and the place just looks classical in many parts. You know, why is that? Why does the museum look like a temple? Why do we do this? Why are there inscriptions in Latin all over the place? But I appreciate that many of our students don't live in a place like here. They may live in a place where everything is modern. They may live in a place where there's nothing classical for miles around. We need to engage them, and I think we engage them through digital media in the first place, and inculcating, cultivating them to find out about the ancient world, perhaps in just a much more, not formal, it's not the right way, in a more constructed, carefully thought out way.
Well, I can tell you with Classical Wisdom, we have over 130,000 fans on Facebook. So
right, there we go.
and you know it's very funny. When we first set it up, I put a few just like charts of ancient Greek gods and mythology on Pinterest, and then like maybe a few years back, I went by and realized we had like 300,000 followers there. So I think you're right. It's good to find people where they are and engage where they are and show, like you said, even a popular post might be the ancient Greek hairstyles, or showing these columns and understanding how columns work. And I think you're right that there's lots of ways that we could generate interest on the tools and platforms that we have now. But I'd love to also get some more into the methods into teaching these ancient languages. I'd like to go back to Gerardo, if we can, about some of the historic methods that we need to sort of bring back.
Yes. Well, the first thing is that we must understand that many of the more recent of the very fresh methods are the traditional methodology. In order to read, we need write. In order to write, we need speak. But the reading and the writing is the way to correct. Well, in the modern languages, we use storytelling, total physical response, but many of these techniques existed before in the rhetorical and in the ancient rhetorical schools and in the Renaissance schools. We must understand too, we must remind you that the Byzantine teachers, the Byzantine wise men who arrived to Europe from Constantinople, translate many kind of methodologies into a new context in order to in order to save the ancient Greek of this very bad state of the moment. This is Latin, of course, was very important, but the philosophy was a reading on a very, very hard, in a very, very complex Latin. And when the Byzantine people saw that, they say, but this is not a traduction. This is not a translation of Greek, because you cannot find Greek here. This is no more Greek. This is not Aristotle. We must read again Aristotle. We must read again Homer, Plato. If you want, read again Plato, Aristotle, Homer, all the authors. You must speak ancient Greek. You must describe images. And then the humanistic schools used these tools, describe images, singing was very, very important. And Eugenia, as a musician, know that it's the briefest way to learn a lot of words, a lot of syntaxes, and to be happy in the progress. We can see that, for example, in our students from high school, because many students from high school visited the academy, and some students, I can say that Greek students who was very, very impressed that because they was singing Tirteus, they was singing Sappho, Anacreon, or Latin poetry. They love the Latin poetry. For us, many times, the study of Latin and Greek is an enigma. We must work 2, 3, 4 hours in order to translate 3 lines. 3 lines. And of course, no one can resist for a long time suffering in this way. And then the methodology to singing, to describing images, to transforming the text. For example, it was a very, very common exercise in the ancient rhetorical schools. If I can offer you a very small tale, and you can add the parts, in the W in the journalism is from the rhetorical schools: quis, quando, quomodo, quibus auxiliis, is the way to increase our style. When we do that, we can understand the very rhetorical texts which we received from the antiquity. Antiquity, I mean, and when I say antiquity, it means from 2 centuries ago too, because this antiquity in Greek is archaiotes, is not only something in the past, is the basis and the origin of many things which are present still now. And then with the appropriated methodology, we can give an input to the students, because they can play. They can. And Erasmus, in some letters, say, I saw kids playing, laughing, writing, singing in Latin and in Greek. Of course, if someone can be happy, the students, the young people, try to continue in this way. And then it's not necessary create philologists from them. It becomes, as Thucydides said, actema eis ia, this a possession and a good for all the time. We can preserve that for all our lives. This happiness, this knowledge, this deep knowledge, and it's necessary only to come back to the traditional methodology. In Great Britain, one of the most important teachers of the last centuries, William Denon Rouse, wrote that we must come back to the traditional England method. He was speaking about the humanistic methodology against the very hard grammar. It doesn't mean leave the grammar, but when we play, when we write, we are working very hard and very precisely in grammar, but it's not the goal. Know only the grammar. Our goal is always read the text. And for this reason, when we write, I can offer you an example. Another kind of exercise is the reading of a text and the searching of many structures and many idioms in the text. For example, if we read the story about Spartacus by Plutarch, we can tell the Greek Revolution. When we are reading Thucydides, we can speak about all the things which we see in this very moment of the history around around ourselves, and then it creates a link between the student and the world. This is the very traditional methodology. This is the very fresh methodology. Understand that this methodology practicing with movement, with singing, writing, reading, is the unique and the bravest way to learn a language. And mostly the very rhetorical languages, which are Latin and Greek.
Thank you so much. Yeah, there's a lot to take in there. Eugenia, do you have more tactics you would want to add to that, or Stephen?
No, I totally agree. And I mean, I remember myself being a young girl. I used to learn so many English songs, and it helped me so much to learn and practice learning English this way. The same thing with French or Italian. I mean, who doesn't want to sing in a foreign language? So it's the same thing that we're trying to do with ancient Greek and Latin. Try to incorporate the joy of singing, and at the same time, learn without a lot of effort. So theater, drama, for me also works very much with kids. We teach them we teach them dialogues by acting, as I mentioned before. Experiential learning, taking them to field trips. As Gerardo said, we took our teenagers to a trip to the Vivarium Novum Academy. And that in this way, they actually saw people that are not Greek speak to them in ancient Greek. Young people, young teachers that taught ancient Greek to them. So this is it's really impressive to the kids, and it's inspiring them. And today, with so much technology, which, by the way, that this word is also Greek, and I recently found out that machine learning, mechanikis mathisis, is also a Greek word, and that artificial intelligence was first mentioned by Homer. With autonomous ships, by the way, again, a Greek word, autonomous. So there's so many things. It's such I refer to those words and to the etymology of those words because I see in the comments that many of the people in the audience mention etymology as a very effective way for teenagers to come closer to the language. So to me, art, visits, experiential learning. We have the amazing opportunity here in Athens to be able to take our children to museums, to the monuments, and play in situ, on the very site that things were happening. And this is an amazing experience to us. We have had parents that were bringing the children here. The children were so happy that the parents were wondering whether we were really teaching them ancient Greek. Because, you know, having a traumatic experience when they were at school, they said, you know, it's impossible. Are you really teaching them ancient Greek? Because the children were running to come in the classroom. And when the class was over, they did not want to leave. So if we can do it, it can happen. It's not a dream. It's not a vision. It's a reality. We do it here in Elliniki Agogi. Stephen does it for many, many years in Cambridge. Gerardo is doing it in the Vivarium Novum. And there's so many other people that are doing it as we speak. I see Juan Coder in our audience. Juan Coder translated The Little Prince in ancient Greek and has this wonderful website that writes the news, the international news in ancient Greek. And he has been doing that for 20 years. I mean, how amazing is that?
Well, I think that's absolutely amazing. And I think we should definitely include a link to The Little Prince in ancient Greek when this recording goes out, because I'm sure there's plenty of you who would want to get your own copy. Stephen, I'd love to get your thoughts on this as well.
I was just going to say, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, obviously, I'm going to go from a very practical point of view. And I think we have to remember that children, you know, they grow up, they get older, they spend more time doing languages, and they get more proficient as time goes on, the more you expose them to it. I'm just going to demonstrate a couple of very simple things that I do teacher training here in Cambridge. And one of the things I'm trying to get them to do is to experiment and report on their research, as it were, into using slightly more communicative approaches for teaching classical languages in their schools. Because one of the problems that we have is that we don't have that many people who are comfortable or fluent enough to be able to hold a conversation in Latin or ancient Greek. You know, imagine you're a 23-year-old going into a school classroom with 31 children. It's quite intimidating just to teach them English, let alone to teach them in Latin. So I'm not expecting them to do that. But what we are trying out are very, very simple things. I don't know whether you can see this. This is a character from one of the course books that a lot of people use in the UK. You can ask a very simple question about this picture. You can say, "Est femina an vir?" Is it a woman or is it a man? And with a bit of enthusiasm, the kids would be able to answer "Est femina" or femina or whatever. Est femina an vir? Est femina. Est femina an vir? They'll go, well, vir est. Okay. Est coquus? He's a cook. Est mater? She's a mother. Est mater? Minime. Non est mater. Est coquus. And you see, very, very simple little phrases like that, where you give students alternatives in which they can repeat back what they have said, is a way we know, which you do in modern languages. You do it with your pencil case, or you do it with the board rubber, you do it with the book, or you do it with whatever. We don't do it in Latin very much because we look at words on a page rather than we look at people. And students are interested in people and what people do. People hopefully a little bit different from themselves, but you know, people just the same. So very simple things where you ask very simple questions. And the thing about that is incredibly efficient, because in the time that I've just spent with you, you've already learnt, well, whether you've not learnt it perfectly, but you've started to learn the idea that there's this word femina and this word vir, there's this word est, and maybe coquus, if you're listening hard, coquus and mater. That's, I don't know, that sounds to me like 6 or 7 items of vocabulary, which we've done in about 10 seconds. Whereas if I were to do that in an exercise book, it would probably take a lot longer. And I can do this periodically again and again throughout the lesson. I wouldn't do it for the whole lesson, but I do it periodically during a lesson and again and again. very simple way of getting students to, my trainee teachers, to use Latin actively, to students in the classroom to listen to words and to get them associated with objects. Because what we want students to be able to do, we know this from all language learning, is we want students to be able to associate a word with its concept, with its meaning. Okay, we want people to say that, see the word matter and think it's mother, not translate it on the page mother, but to associate the word matter instantly with the idea mother. So they need to see and hear and listen and say. We talk about multimodal learning. We do it in modern languages a lot. We say it, we see it, we write it, we listen to it, we watch videos of it, the teacher performs in front of us, we do performances to each other, etc., etc. We need to do more of that in Latin and ancient Greek as well. I know Eugenia does Eugenia, you do a great deal of that with your students. I know that you do a great deal of that over in the academia. We need to do more of it in our classrooms as well. We need to do multimodal language learning for Latin. It's efficient and it's fast, and we know it works. It might not, it's been interesting. I've been looking at some of the things in the chat, and people have been a little concerned about syntax. You know, ancient syntax is very complicated and all the rest. Yes, ancient syntax and modern syntax also can be very difficult, very complicated. But in the starting place, with younger students, we want to get vocabulary into their heads. You can't do anything about syntax until you've got vocabulary. And the best way of getting vocabulary is playing with it like this, with physical objects and talking about real live things. Not learning lists of words, not learning lists of endings, but learning about people and things. Another thing I get my trainees, this is the last thing I'm going to say. The other thing I get my trainees to do, when the students are more competent and are reading texts, maybe not original text, maybe adapted pedagogical texts, is to ask questions in Latin from which the answers can be found in the text in front of them. So, for example, imagine the text said something like, oh, I don't know, coquus est in culina, right? Coquus est in culina, the cook's in the kitchen. Coquus in culina laborat, the cook is working in the kitchen. Multam canam, coquit, he's cooking lots of dinner. It's terrible Latin, I know, never mind. I could ask several questions. I could say, quis est in culina? And all the student has to do is look at the page and identify who's in the kitchen, and they would say, coquus. Or they might say, coquus est in culina, to extra points. Quid facit in culina? What's he doing? Apologise for my pronunciation, never mind. Quid facit in culina? What's he doing in the kitchen? And the student would be able to say, coquit in culina. So it's a very simple thing. One of the things that my trainee teachers are really worried about active Latin teaching is they don't have the confidence to both manage a class of 31 and also have sufficient fluency in Latin. But these two methods I've just shown you here are very fail-safe, simple processes, which I think are easy to achieve, both for the teacher to do and also for kids to learn. Okay, it's not going to get them reading Cicero just yet, but it's a start.
Yes, and I believe that we really need to motivate the teachers, because the teachers are very insecure. They're constantly asking, but can we do it? And this is why we're trying to help teachers, like Stephen is trying to help through Classics for All. And we're trying to help teachers teach the best way they can. They are concerned, they are insecure when they realize that it's very not easy, but it can be done and they can do it. If they, the only thing is that if they want to do it, it's the desire to do it. If they want, if they are willing to try, it's really easy. I mean, Stephen just demonstrated what he's doing with kids. I mean, for teachers, it's the easiest thing. Now I saw it, now I can do it, and I don't even speak a word of Latin. So it's, but I want to do it. I have the desire to learn how to do this. Now we do the same thing, especially because, you know, most of the times here in Greece, we teach kids that are fluent in modern Greek, but we do the same thing in the States, with the Greek schools of the diaspora. The same thing in Canada, in Montreal. And I see here the director of the schools in Montreal, he's doing an impeccable job trying to convince the teachers to jump in and give it a shot, because they're very reluctant, and I can understand they have never done this before. But through etymology, play, fun, drama, repetition, the kids really love it. Maybe not all the kids, but the majority of the kids do love it, and they want to engage. And they go back home being really proud to know that the word father comes from patir, and and mother from meat. And there's so many other things that I can really talk about right now, but I don't want to take up more of the time. But it's exactly the same point. If you act and you show and you play and you really want to do this, it is not hard. It just needs, the motivation and the desire of the educator to do it.
I think that's
It's
also
harder.
well said.
It's harder to convince the educator than to convince the kids.
I think we can add that. Sorry, sorry. Yes, I think we can add another thing. Yes, we see that many times here in Italy, since Professor Miraglia, the principal of the academy, introduced the Familia Romana into in Italy. Well, many teachers say, but we don't speak Latin. Well, in the beginning, it's not so necessary, because as Steve said, the first chapters are ubi est Italia, Italia in Europa est. Esne Grecia in Europa, Grecia quoque in Italia est. Very simple sentences. But gradually, we can increase the vocabulary, the syntax. And many times the students love a lot when you start explaining the preposition on the table, under the table, around the table, but or the teacher or one of the students is over the table, under the table, running around the table. They can see, they can use the syntax. Perhaps in this way, it's a very simple example. But when you use a text, a good tool for the teaching, as Steve said, you can speak about the argument in the book. You can tell the story with other words in another time, and you can practice that, and it becomes a game too, a joke too. Sometimes we do that. When we introduce doom, we can, when it becomes something else. Dum medus ambulat, lupus descendit de montibus. Where Medus is walking, a wolf comes down from the mountain. And then we can add another part, and then it's a specialty of one of our teachers, Eusebius, who called that the crazy stories, because you can offer this possibility to the students to play with the phrases of the book in order to create a new story, but they are inside of the grammar, inside of the syntax, but they don't perceive. They are enjoying the reading and the learning. It's very, very important to understand that the methodology and the adequate tools could help a lot. And for the teacher, it's a way to learn too.
Now, I'd love to get a few questions in from the audience. I know it's going quite late already, so I might just dive into just one or two so I can get the audience participating. And this one's from Juan, that with regards to Latin, the difference in pronunciation is hardly felt. But when it comes to how to pronounce ancient Greek, the problem is much harder. Is it like modern Greek, Eratosthenes pronunciation? The differences are much wider than the differences between the different pronunciations in Latin. And it's something I've always loved about ancient Greek, because then when I inevitably mispronounce something, I could blame it on that. But it is an important question when it comes to pronunciation for ancient Greek.
No, I don't think this is an important point. I think that regardless of pronunciation, everybody who wants to speak ancient Greek, they can speak and each one can understand. And I'm a living example of this, because when I went to the Vivarium Novum Academy, where they use the Erasmian pronunciation, I spoke with the Greek pronunciation. Maybe in the beginning, it's a little bit tricky to understand. And it took me a few minutes to get accustomed to the Erasmian pronunciation, but then right away I could understand. Sometimes I'd get carried away and I use the Erasmian pronunciation when I speak, and so do people that speak back to me. They use the Greek pronunciation, but we understand one another. I mean, I've seen so many debates on pronunciation, which I really don't understand why this is the issue. I mean, the point is to learn the language. If you love the language and you learn it, aren't there many pronunciations in English? I mean, Australians and British and Americans, why is the American pronunciation more correct than the Australian one? Or, you know, the Scottish, even it's even worse. You can understand the Scots. I mean, but you love the person, you want to get close to them, you want to understand their points, and this is what it's all about.
I'm married to an Australian, so I can completely concur with this point. I still have no idea what my mother-in-law says most of the time.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, it probably is. Now,
I mean, in terms of the Greek stuff, I think the really important thing is, this goes both for Greek and for Latin, is that we shouldn't have silent classrooms. Because if you have silent classrooms, you're never quite sure whether the students are learning anything. They might be listening, but you can never tell. Their ears are open, but you can't tell what's going on inside. If you get students actually talking, reading aloud, saying a few words, you know some learning is taking place. So I know people get very, very exercised about the correct, or what they feel is the correct pronunciation of ancient Greek. But actually, it's, to my mind, it's a distraction from the pedagogical importance of merely speaking a language. You learn languages by using them, not by staring at them in a book.
I think I can offer to an example. In the academy, we use more or less all the pronunciations because we leave the students to choose the pronunciation. For example, I use the Italian pronunciation, but the other teacher and some students uses the restored pronunciation. And if we read, for example, Quintilian, he said that at the same time, into Rome and outside Rome, there were many pronunciations of Latin. At the time of Cicero, we have examples of different kinds of pronunciation in Italy, and then in Spain. Then is no problem. If we can understand, this is enough. The same for Greek pronunciation. I think, in my opinion, the new Greek pronunciation is the historical pronunciation, at the least from Aristotle. But nevertheless, for many people, it's a little bit hard to understand. Well, they can use this restored pronunciation. We can remember that French is not the same way in reading that in a pronunciation, or English too. And then if we can speak, if we can have dialogues, if we can understand the other people with these languages, we can do the same with ancient languages. The important point is understand each other, because our goal is always the reading of the text. Speaking is a very good tool, but it's not a goal. The goal is every time. It's a practice. Yes, of course, it's a practice.
This is why I love Spanish, because you actually pronounce every letter. It's wonderful like that. Okay, I think we have time for just one last question, because I think one of the hugest problems that kind of gets identified again and again is trying to get the interest and showing the interest to students, showing the interest to teachers, and showing interest even at a governmental or institutional level. And so this question is from Herman. Would classical languages be relevant to a diverse population of minorities? Here in San Francisco, there's a large move to go away from any Eurocentric study. And I think that's probably a common trend. So I think it's an important one for us to address. I don't know who wants to take it first.
Well, perhaps
No one does.
I can try. I think
There's
I'm a little bit more safe because I'm Mexican. And then I will try. This is, as I was saying in the beginning, these languages are no more the languages only of Europe, are the language of the Western civilization. And because are the languages of the Western civilization, we must understand that many cultures in the East tried to learn these languages. In China, there is a very important movement to teach and to learn Latin and Greek too, because they understand that if they want have a dialogue with the Western civilization, they must understand. It's the same for us. If we want to understand these civilizations, we can read the Brahmanis, which is a work in Latin. If we want to understand Buddhism, we can read to the Perigymnos of Piston. We can read Arrianus. Perhaps it's not a very precise text, but we have some ways to understand that. Greek and Greek people, and then all the Latin writers, and I'm not speaking about the Roman writers, but the Latin writers, because Latin writers are European, but African people too. Tertullian or some Christian authors are the time of the African Latinity is very, very important. Many people in Asia wrote in Greek. Many people then in America, in the new continent, many Aborigines which was were educated in Latin, wrote in Latin. And then we can see that it's not only the language of the Roman Empire or the language of the Alexander Empire, are the language by through we can understand a lot of cultures and join a very important join to them. But the first thing I think is that we can understand that this is not the language or the culture of a kind of or of population. This is or a country. This is my language because it offered me the possibility to be part of that. As Lucian of Samosata, who was a barbarian, but is one of the best writers of ancient Greek, or Augustine, who is an African, but it's an incredible writer of Latin. And it's very, very important for the Western civilization.
Thank you. I think that's very well said. And I do like to remind people that the ancient world covered a large expanse of time and a large geography and was a hugely multicultural and diverse ancient world. I mean, and there's so much to learn from it. So I appreciate your response. Now, I think we've just reached the end of our allotted time, and I have to thank our excellent panelists for dedicating their time and energies. I'm going to include in this recording, of course, all the information, because I think you will find so many amazing resources with all three of your organizations and projects that you guys have been working on, which will be extremely useful for anybody who is wanting to learn or teach the language themselves, trying to encourage those around them to get excited in these languages, or just wants to be aware of what's happening with regard to these. I'm going to let my panelists say goodbye in 1 second, but I also want to say, if you enjoyed this event, Classical Wisdom will be hosting another event in 2 weeks on January 25th, and it is Free Speech on Trial, the history of free speech from Socrates to social media. So as I say, our goal often is to understand the ancient world to help us in our here and now. And also for those interested, Classical Wisdom will also be launching a Classical Wisdom Kids program as well. And we will be able to feature all of our panelists' excellent projects there also in a way to find materials and everything for the next generation. So I will leave you in the capable hands of our panelists to say goodbye. And I want to thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us. Thank you so much, Anya, for this wonderful organization. And we will definitely watch all the rest of the conferences that you're about to host. You're doing an amazing job. And please let us know what you're doing, because we want to spread the message as much as possible, because, you know, it's a unique time. We need the truth. We need the virtue that comes from the texts for us, for our own lives. So thank you so much for having us. And thank you to your wonderful audience.
Thank you.
May I say a word?
Go ahead.
Thank you. I am a theoretical physicist, professor at the Uni Mainz, and I would tell a word about, from the point of view of mathematics, the importance of the Greek language, Latin of course the same, but I know the Greek language. I'm teaching here at the University of Mainz 40 years, and I can tell you, I found afterwards the best students I have had in physics and mathematics. I realized that they had at a school Latin or Asian Greek. This means that Asian Greek builds the possibility for logical thinking much better than the common languages. And this is, among other things, very big how you say, προτέρημα, μεγάλο προτέρημα.
It's a big advantage.
And this a big advantage that I have seen this and even myself a lot. I came to abroad in the year of 70 years old, and I regard my success, if you call it success, the help of the Asian Greek. Therefore, it is important, and you may have also the importance of mathematicians and other scientists, because the language of science is Greek, Asian Greek. This is what to say. Bravo. I call. Thank you very much. Συγχαρητήρια.
Ευχαριστούμε.
Να συνεχίσετε.
You
Ευχαριστώ
must,
πολύ. Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Nicholas, you must visit us in the academy. We have some students. We are very interested in mathematics and pneumatics, physics, and they read that in ancient Greek because they love these arguments. You must visit us. You can read that and perhaps teach us too.
It's very nice to hear this. Thank you. It's very nice to hear this.
Okay, on that note, I will thank you, everybody, and have a lovely day.
Thank you.